In an isolated town of the American South, a fanatical religious community lived by the pages of a single scripture they believed to be divine. But the holy book had warped, its letters twisting like flesh and blood. Each time it was read aloud, it brought not salvation but horror. Joints sprouting from the wrong places, skin rotting away, eyes bulging from their sockets. And when the moon shone down on the rotting church, the grotesque truth was revealed. Their God was no deity at all, but an ancient parasite, feeding through every prayer, waiting to claim as its next host anyone foolish enough to draw near. Jonah Lawson drove along the dirt-red road, flanked on both sides by shadowed swamplands where daylight barely slipped through the trees. The silence was so heavy that the faintest sound, the fall of a leaf, the drone of an insect, echoed like a drum inside his chest. He had come here to investigate a rare religious community, whispered about in chilling rumors, an isolated town, bizarre rituals, and strange bodily deformities that plagued its believers. The village emerged like something abandoned by time. Weather-beaten wooden houses leaned under peeling paint, their windows coated with layers of grime. The people watched him pass with hollowed, stone-worn faces, their voices coarse as if scraped down to rock. Jonah felt as though he had crossed into another world, one where ordinary rules no longer applied. At the town's center stood the old church, its structure corroded from within. The wooden doors hung half open, leaking faint light, and the stench of melted wax mixed with something rancid and decaying. Jonah stepped inside, heart pounding. In the gloom, splintered pews lined the floor like broken teeth. The altar was crusted with dust and hardened wax, and yet, lying upon it, rested the community's only surviving Bible. Inside, a cluster of worshippers knelt on the floor, murmuring prayers. Jonah's breath caught when he noticed. Their skin split into jagged cracks, new joints bulging at unnatural angles, some eyes swelling grotesquely from their sockets. Yet, none of them cried out. Their voices droned on, steady, reverent. Each verse echoed through the church like invisible blades, slicing into flesh, and the convulsions of their bodies became part of the chant. Jonah staggered back, horrified. These mutations were not accidents, not illness. They were the direct consequence of the scripture itself. Every word recited was a knife, every prayer an incision. To the townsfolk, it was a miracle of God. But to Jonah, it was something else. A parasitic force, ancient and unholy, twisting bodies through its scripture. His flashlight caught the Bible on the altar. The letters writhed across the page, trembling and curling like veins under the skin, the sheen of dried blood clinging to the ink. A chill surged down his spine. He realized he stood in the heart of a grotesque covenant, an ancient pact festering behind this community's faith. Jonah inhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. But his pulse hammered on, a frantic reminder. He had crossed into the territory of something older than God, where scripture was not salvation but infection. And he knew, one wrong move, one stray syllable uttered aloud, and he too could be claimed as the next vessel, doomed. Jonah pressed himself into a shadowed corner of the church, eyes fixed on the preacher holding the tattered Bible. Its rough, blistered pages glimmered with a sickly red glow from the wax. The preacher's raspy voice rose and fell, merging with the faint groans of the kneeling worshippers, creating a grotesque, almost symphonic chant. A the woman kneeling near the altar suddenly convulsed. The skin on her arm split open, revealing dark, raw flesh beneath. Jonah's heartbeat spiked. Before he could make sense of it, an old man beside him whispered, "Do not fear, it is the blessing of the Lord." But Jonah could not look away. With each verse, joints twisted, ribs stretched in unnatural ways, eyes bulged or swelled grotesquely. Their bodies warped, yet their voices droned on. No screams, no pleas. Sweat and congealed blood mingled with the reek of rot, thickening the air into something suffocating. A moment later, the preacher turned toward Jonah, his eyes glinting with fervor. "You wish to hear as well, don't you? You want to understand the power of God." His tone rasped and cracked, but each word carried a supernatural weight, pulling Jonah in. Jonah trembled, but could not step back. He saw the writing on the page shift, the letters writhed like snakes slithering across the parchment. As the preacher read on, Jonah's body burned. His hands went numb, as though something inside was clawing for release. He stumbled back, but the floorboards quivered, and the congregation crept closer in unison. Their groans merged with the preacher's chant, the rhythm pounding against Jonah's skull. A strange sensation spread through him. His skin prickled, then turned numb. Jonah looked down. His knuckles twitched. His thumbs seemed to swell and split from his hand, as if a new joint were forming. In a heartbeat, he felt something alien threading through his veins. It wasn't pain. It was worse. A vile vitality taking root inside him. In the wavering glow, Jonah saw the others, deformed yet upright, mouths reciting scripture, eyes gleaming with twisted ecstasy. He realized this Bible was no vessel of salvation but a tool, an ancient parasite invading flesh, word by word, prayer by prayer. Sweat and blood dripped from his brow as he steadied himself. He knew one moment of weakness, one slip into the rhythm of those words, and he would no longer be human. In the chorus of groans and the preacher's rasping voice, Jonah understood. If he wished to survive, he would have to trace this rotten scripture back to its root. But here, every step was peril, every breath a potential offering to the ancient power that already ruled the faithful. Shah. Jonah could retreat no further. The stench of rot, dried blood, and burning wax pressed against his lungs, choking him. Each step seemed to sink into the rotting wooden floor, while the groans of the deformed worshippers merged with the scripture, a grotesque chorus not meant for the living. He noticed a small trapdoor beneath the altar. One brick was loose, revealing faint light spilling from below. On its surface, words had been carved, glowing faintly red like clotted blood. Jonah inhaled sharply, his trembling hand pushing the hatch open. A rush of cold air escaped, thick with decay. Yet underneath it, something pulsed with life. Descending, Jonah saw them. Countless half-rotten corpses still moving, their flesh sloughing away in wet strips. Eyes bulged from sockets, joints had sprouted extra hinges, skin peeled in ragged patches. A suffocating dread weighed down on his spirit. This was not illness, not ritual, but the direct handiwork of the ancient parasite. He staggered back, but the figures advanced slowly. Their whispers invaded his head. The scripture wasn't just on paper. It lived across their skin, etched into blood and bone, spreading through every breath. Each word was a root piercing into Jonah's flesh, making his skin sting, his joints ache, his blood clot beneath the surface. Jonah quivered, but forced himself to hide his fear. Observing closely, He realized these abominations retained a twisted consciousness. They murmured verses, howling with a mix of agony and ecstasy, eyes lit with an unnatural black glow. The parasite used the holy text as a tool of hypnosis, turning every believer into a living host, sustaining its existence through generations. Above, he heard the creak of collapsing boards, the preacher and his flock preparing the nightly ritual. Jonah knew this would be greater than anything before, something meant to unleash the parasite across the entire town. He had to escape, but every step risked attack. The corpses seemed to track him, ready to pounce at the slightest movement. He slipped deeper into the cellar and discovered a storeroom filled with old scripture pages. Many were caked with dried slime, their letters writhing faintly as though alive. Jonah flipped one page and felt a stabbing under his skin, as if the words themselves were burrowing into him. The verses crawled, hissing against the paper, and his heart clenched with dread. This parasite controlled everything through the book, through each syllable spoken aloud. Suddenly, a corpse reached out and touched his shoulder. Jonah flinched, blood rushing to his face. In a blink, the creature pulled back, but in his mind echoed a hideous moan, rotting scripture threading itself through his thoughts, verse by verse. He swallowed hard. Unless he destroyed the root of this corrupted Bible, the entire town and himself would be consumed as hosts. He froze in the cellar, eyes fixed on the stairway above. The ritual was about to begin. The faithful still believed this was a miracle. But Jonah knew the truth. The miracle was rotten from the inside out. If he did not act now, the parasite would spread unchecked, reshaping every living body into its brood. Below, the corpses moaned, the scriptures writhed, and Jonah understood. There was only one path left, to face the source of the rotting covenant directly, or die as its next vessel. No. Pull now. Jonah crept up from the cellar, every step echoing inside the decaying church. Above, enormous crimson candles bled their light into the suffocating air. The congregation was gathered, kneeling, their eyes gleaming with grotesque rapture as they muttered scripture under their breath. The preacher stood at the pulpit, his ragged voice booming. "Tonight, the Lord will bless us, through every soul offered." As his words fell, a slick tide of red wax oozed from the altar, curling around the worshippers' feet. Their skin shriveled, their limbs sprouted extra joints, eyes bulged from sockets, yet their mouths kept chanting, their voices unwavering, as though hypnotized. Jonah crouched in the shadows, sweat soaking his brow. He realized the parasite was no longer confined to their flesh. It saturated the entire church, seeping into the very air, lacing itself into every breath, every heartbeat. A chill swept through him as his own skin prickled, muscles tightening painfully. One worshiper staggered toward him, brushing a hand across Jonah's shoulder. Instantly his joints twitched, his skin swelled, nerves flared with agony as though something inside was splitting him apart. The groans of the congregation merged with scripture, pounding against his skull, dragging him to the brink of panic. The preacher sneered, his eyes blazing crimson. "You are the chosen. You shall become the final vessel to complete the covenant." Jonah knew then there was no turning back. They bound him to the altar, where beneath the wood and stone pulsed a massive mass of slime. Covered in weeping eyes and moaning mouths, its body throbbing in rhythm with the recited verses. Each word clung to Jonah's flesh, burrowing into bone, searing his skin, knotting his limbs into grotesque shapes. Blood thickened beneath his skin, bones strained as though sprouting anew. He screamed, Yet consciousness lingered, long enough to understand that the parasite did not want his death. It wanted his body, alive, to be the seed for its spread. In one desperate, lucid moment, Jonah looked upon the deformed husks surrounding him, their chanting rattling in his ears. He made his choice. Straining against the ropes, he toppled a great candle, spilling fire onto the writhing red wax below. Flames roared upward, shrieks of scripture twisting into a chorus of agony as the entire church convulsed. The blaze consumed everything. Smoke choked the air. The warped faithful flailed in torment before collapsing into ash. Jonah crumpled, the stench of burning flesh filling his lungs as the last flame sputtered and darkness swallowed the room. But from within the ashes, a faint whisper lingered. The covenant is not broken. A warning that the parasite had not been destroyed, only silenced. For now. Nay. Ash choked the air, the acrid stench of smoke clawing into Jonah's lungs. He lay face down on the damp earth, sweat mixing with soot, hands trembling. The inferno had gutted most of the church, but the whispers lingered, soft and relentless, threading through his mind. The twisted husks of the faithful had withered in the blaze, yet Jonah knew the parasite was not destroyed. It had seeped into the ashes, into the half-burnt scriptures, waiting for a chance to bloom again. A prickling numbness spread through his body, skin cracking dry, limbs curling tight, heart hammering against his ribs. Every breath was a reminder that his life was being gnawed away from within. Forcing himself upright, Jonah fixed his gaze on the fragments of charred scripture drifting in the pale moonlight. His act had stopped a great ritual, sparing what remained of the town, but the cost was unbearable. Part of him was already infected, his hands roughened, bone pushing unnaturally against skin. He whispered to himself, "As long as I breathe, as long as I remain myself, I must keep it from spreading." Yet, even in that rare silence, a long, worming murmur seeped out of the ashes. Rotted verses, writhing, curling into his ears like a hymn of horror. The flames had died, but the parasite endured. In dust, in paper, in every grain of ash. It had not been destroyed, only waiting for another body to claim. Jonah stumbled out of the ruin, his feet sinking into the wet soil, moonlight glinting on drifting motes of ash. The town was silent, as if nothing had happened. Yet he knew the parasite was still watching, still threading through every shadow. He was the only survivor, but also a carrier, marked by the covenant scar. The others were gone. The church lay in smoldering ruin. Jonah stood amidst the wreckage, staring up at the moon, crushed by a loneliness deeper than death. His survival was a hollow victory, haunted by whispers that refused to fade. He closed his eyes as pain lanced through his veins. He had lived, but part of him was forever altered, scarred by the parasite's touch. And in the southern night, the whisper of the rotten scripture lingered, faint, ceaseless, a warning that the covenant had never truly ended. Wah. I started my new job at Will Rogers Airport. I say new job, but I was really just moved to a different airline and working on the same ramp agent position. Now, I have to tell you that I have a crippling fear of heights, and my least favorite part of being a ramp agent is when I have to climb in a cargo bin or rear-loading plane, because it's about 20 feet above the ground. The first thing is, it was raining, not just light raining, but pouring rain with a few scattered lightning flashes and random power surges every now and then. we have dead bodies transported into cargo bins. This was one of those occasions, and tonight was my lucky night, apparently, because my manager told me I was throwing this plane. Throwing me, I was pulling the cargo out of the bin. It was the last plane for the night, and wasn't very much cargo besides the body. My co-worker, John, pulled the ramp loader to the plane and raised it up so I could walk up to the conveyor belt to enter the bin. About 4 other co-workers came over with a baggage tug for the cargo. I said to everyone, in a louder than normal tone because the rain was loudly smacking the metal shell of the airplane, I hope you all are ready. I'm not trying to be out here all night. John laughed and said, "Don't worry about it. Maybe you can find a new friend in there." In reference to the bodies. I didn't think it was funny, but I chuckled and told him to shut up and let's get going. I climbed into the small and cramped space and sat in the bin, as far from the human-sized white cardboard box as I could, and pulled my phone out of my pocket to select the playlist to listen to while I threw the bin. I found the bin and started working. The conveyor belt moves at a snail's pace, and you have to wait until they scan each individual package. So I can't just throw them as fast as I want to get out of there. About 10 minutes into it, I was getting closer and closer to this box, and my music stopped playing. I've had earbuds that short out when they get wet, so in the front of my mind, I automatically assumed that the rain somehow got on it, and I just needed to shake the little water out of them. But they were bone dry. I checked Spotify to see if it was a glitch or a problem with the app, and I saw I had an unread text. Did I get a notification and forget in the midst of my rapid-fire baggage handling? The way my phone is set up, when I get a message, it will tell you who it is from, but it won't display the message. You have to access them and read it. The message was from an unknown number, which was odd, because very few people have my number. I clicked the notification, and I read the message. All it said was, "Hi." I sent a text back and said, "Oh, who is this?" My phone displayed that whoever sent the message saw mine immediately after it sent. I waited, no response. I started my playlist back up and got back to my job. Shortly after, a crash of thunder so loud the plane shook made me jump at first, but I quickly rationalized it and returned to work. I noticed the conveyor belt was no longer moving. I yelled to John, "What the hell is going on up there? Why did it stop?" He told me, "Sit tight, they're gonna drop off this load." I thought to myself, where else am I gonna go? About 1 minute later, it got cold. Like I could see my breath cold. I wrote it off as just a cold front. I reached over for some stranger's luggage to lean on while I waited. As I looked over for a bag to grab, lightning went across the sky, and I saw a quick flash. A little boy, 11, maybe 12 years old, sitting on a white box, staring at me with this eerily happy smile, and his head turned slightly to the side. My heart sunk, and I froze, never taking my eyes off that box for what felt like hours. I was startled by the replacement conveyor belt starting up right next to the plane. I darted to the moving conveyor, crawling as fast as I could, trying to keep my balance and panic at the same time. I hit the ground, looked at John and said, "Nope, I'm done. You're gonna have to go in there." I didn't want to explain exactly what I saw, but John knew something scared me, so he asked me what was wrong and who was it. I stuttered a little bit, then walked away before I could see anything. Then I got a new text message notification that I heard loud and clear this time. It responded from the unknown sender saying, "It's your new friend. This incident took place in my old house in the winter of 2013. Me, being 12 years old, my mom had gone on a vacation to visit her friend in Bakersfield, California, leaving us home alone. My sister Aurora, who was the oldest at 21, would be watching us, as well as my brother Austin, 19. Back then, Austin and Aurora had come back from the local gas station to grab some snacks, hot dogs, hamburgers, slushies, candy and chips. Austin also got a pizza from Little Caesars, as we were going to watch a football game that night. It was December 15th, 2013, when it was pitch black out. The game being either the third or fourth quarter. Even over the commentator and the loud sound coming from the TV, we could hear a faint yet very slight scratching sound coming from the garage. It sounded like our cats were scratching the wood in the garage, or maybe one of the dogs. Addison, my little sister, was looking around for the dogs and cats when she found them all in the basement, resting in either our billet room or the 2 bedrooms we had down there. Addison came upstairs and told us, and we were pretty reasonably shaken. The scratching continued, and it only made us feel more unsettled. Austin and Aurora looked pretty shaken when we heard a loud collapsing sound in the garage. It sounded like someone climbed up the ladder to our storage area, went through all of our boxes, and shuffled them around. That's when it hit us. Bailey, my other sister, turned off the TV, while Ali, another one of my sisters, went to go turn off the lights. Addison hid in one of my basement bedrooms. Ali hid behind the china cabinet in our other basement bedroom. I was hiding under my bed. Aurora and Bailey were hiding behind my parents' bed. Then someone opened the door to our house and slammed it shut. It was a man. The man said in a rough voice, walking into the bedrooms, "Aurora, Austin, Ali, Bailey, Elijah, Addison, I would like to give you some candy." He also said our full names at one point, and somehow knew our middle names. The man started pounding on the 3-bedroom doors and screaming that he had a bunch of candy canes and he just wanted to spread Christmas cheer. Austin jumped on the man from behind. He actually had a huge kitchen knife. Austin managed to stop him from stabbing or cutting him. The cops arrived a minute later, and the man was still in Austin's possession. But Austin had left him for maybe 20 seconds, and when he went back into the hallway, the man was gone. We heard the front door shut, and Austin never caught the guy. Unfortunately, the story doesn't even end yet. One day, when I was 15, I was walking home from school with Addison and Bailey. By then, Aurora, Austin, and Ali had all moved out. I opened the front door to see everything shifted around, and the whole house was trashed. We found this incredibly odd, and even more disturbing was the terrible foul smell coming from our basement. 5 of our dogs, Rocky, Roscoe, PT, Coco, and Bingo, were all clawing at the basement door. I opened the door. Since Rocky, Coco, and Bingo were all German shepherds, they weren't scared, while PT and Roscoe, who were golden retrievers, were petrified. Rocky went down first. He was acting very brave, then looked in the basement bedrooms and started barking. Our basement bedrooms are like this. One is off in the billet room, and there's a door at the back of the room leading to another basement bedroom. One was our guest room office, and the other was a storage room that was formerly our playroom. But Rocky was barking into our storage room. Bailey and Addison were upstairs, cowering, while me and Rocky were downstairs in the storage room, scavenging around. I turned on the fan and the light. Then I heard, "Elijah, come down here, please." I jumped. The man from that one night in December stood up with a knife. Rocky pinned the guy to the floor, biting him profusely. I screamed for Addison or Bailey to call the cops. They arrived in 5 minutes while Rocky was still on top of the man. He was arrested and had been responsible for several crimes. I had forgotten about both incidents for a while. We actually moved out of that house a few days ago, which was June 11th, 2020. When we were looking at the house for one last look, Bailey looked at the wall behind the china cabinet in the guest room and screamed. There was old carved blood into the wall that said, "I will come back." I will forever be grateful toward Rocky and Austin, both saving our lives. Coco, unfortunately, died in August 2017 due to lymphoma. This incident will forever haunt me, and I hope we never see that man again. He was sentenced to 12 years.
Up in a post-Columbine world, where lockdowns were stitched into the fabric of school life the same way fire drills had been for my parents. They were constant, hovering over everything we did, an unspoken reminder that safety was never guaranteed. By the time I hit high school, the sharp buzz of the intercom announcing a lockdown hardly made me flinch. We all knew the drill. Teachers locking the doors, shades drawn, lights snapped off in an instant, chairs scraping against linoleum as we crouched in corners, breathing shallowly, pretending our bodies could melt into the walls. At first, when I was younger, every drill spiked terror in me. But after a while, they became as mechanical as taking attendance. Still, even when it felt routine, there was always the quiet understanding that the world outside those classroom walls was unpredictable. The uncertainty lingered like static in the air. You never really knew. That morning in 11th grade started the same way as any other, though I was running later than usual. I had spilled coffee down the front of my shirt. Clumsy, half awake me, and darted into the bathroom to scrub the stain away. The scent of disinfectant clung to the white tiles as I stood at the sink, dabbing furiously at the spreading brown blotch with a rough paper towel. The mirror reflected a face flushed with annoyance and embarrassment, strands of hair sticking up where I'd rushed through brushing. I was still muttering under my breath when the intercom above me crackled, a scratchy burst of sound that made me jump. Lockdown, 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 4 times. Always 4, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the words themselves, they were familiar enough, but the tone, the clipped urgency in the secretary's voice. My stomach dropped cold. For one suspended second, I simply stared at the wall, the tile squares blurring together as if my brain couldn't process the moment. Then I snapped back, heart suddenly hammering, and yanked the bathroom door open. The hallway stretched ahead of me, eerily empty. Just minutes ago, it had been bustling with voices, footsteps, the slam of lockers. Now it looked like a photograph of itself, frozen and lifeless. Every classroom door was already shut tight, shades drawn, the silence unnerving in its completeness. Down the stairwell, I thought I caught a noise, raised voices, maybe a shout carried upward, but I couldn't be sure. My pulse spiked so hard it felt like it was trying to tear out of my chest. Instinct kicked in. Without thinking, I slipped back into the bathroom. The space suddenly felt cavernous, sound bouncing too sharply off the walls. My sneakers squeaked faintly on the tile as I hurried to the last stall, the farthest from the door, and eased myself inside. The metal lock hovered under my hand, but I hesitated. If I clicked it shut, it would be obvious, too obvious, that someone was hiding. I left it unlatched, my hand shaking as I climbed onto the toilet seat, pressing my body against the stall wall as though I could sink right through it. My breathing came too fast, too loud in my own ears. I forced myself to hold still, to quiet, to make myself as small and invisible as possible. The silence dragged on. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was just a drill, maybe a precaution for something minor happening down the street. Maybe I had only imagined the sharpness in the secretary's voice, the edge that didn't belong to routine. I wanted to believe it. I almost convinced myself it was nothing, until the sound came. Footsteps, slow, measured, each one distinct, striking the tiled floor like a metronome, echoing louder as they drew closer. I froze, breath lodged painfully in my chest. My body screamed at me to move, to do something, but all I could do was press myself tighter against the wall, every muscle rigid. The bathroom door creaked open with agonizing slowness. For a moment, the only thing I could hear was the pounding of my pulse in my ears, so loud it almost drowned everything else out. Then another sound slipped through, the faint rhythm of breathing. Not mine. Too steady, too deliberate. I clenched my jaw to keep my own from breaking into gasps. The first stall door screeched as it swung open, then slammed shut with a metallic bang that ricocheted through the tiled room. My whole body jolted. Then another stall and another, each opening and slamming in turn, the rhythm methodical and terrifying. My legs trembled, struggling to hold me balanced on the narrow porcelain rim of the toilet seat. Sweat slid cold down my spine. When the intruder reached the stall beside mine, something changed. The smell hit first, an earthy scent, damp and raw, like soil after rain. Mud, maybe, or wet grass clinging to heavy boots. It was so out of place in the sterile bathroom that my throat clenched involuntarily. Whoever it was had come in from outside. My mind screamed with questions. Who? Why? What were they carrying? But my body refused to let me move. Even to blink. The handle to my stall rattled. The metal jiggled softly, insistently. But the door didn't swing open. It lingered there, quivering in someone's grasp, as if they were testing it, weighing whether or not to push. My eyes flicked down against my will to the tiny crack between door and frame. A sliver of shadow shifted there, human-shaped, breathing-shaped, inches away from me. I dug my nails into the stall wall, forcing my lungs to stop moving, praying for invisibility. Time distorted. I don't know how long I stood frozen, suspended in dread, waiting for the door to explode open. Every second stretched, endless and suffocating. My vision tunneled until all I could see was that strip of shadow, that movement just beyond reach. And then, the intercom crackled again, startling in the oppressive silence. "Lockdown is now complete. Thank you for your cooperation." The words, rote and practiced, poured into the bathroom like light through a crack in a door. Relief surged in me, but it tangled with confusion, disbelief. Complete? Cooperation? My eyes darted back to the stall door. On the other side, the shadow shifted. The handle stilled. Slowly, deliberately, the footsteps began retreating. Each one echoed softer, farther, until the bathroom door shut with a quiet click. Then, nothing. Silence. I didn't move. Couldn't. I remained perched on the toilet, every muscle locked in place, until pins and needles crawled up my legs, until the threat of collapse outweighed the terror of moving. Only then did I climb down, my knees buckling slightly under me. My reflection in the metal stall door looked pale, eyes wide and wild, shirt still damp from the coffee stain I'd almost forgotten about. When I finally pushed the stall open, the bathroom looked exactly as it had before. Silent, ordinary, empty. For a heartbeat, I wondered if I had imagined everything, if my mind had spiraled during what really was just a drill. But then I saw them, near the sink, faint on the glossy tiles, a trail of wet boot prints leading out the door. Each print darkened by mud, the edges smudged but distinct. My stomach lurched. I followed them with my eyes until they vanished into the hallway beyond. That was when I noticed the paper. It lay half hidden beneath my stall door, pressed into the dust along the edge of the tile. A scrap, torn unevenly, its edges ragged. My fingers trembled as I bent to pick it up, dread already coiling tight in my gut. The handwriting across it was shaky, letters jagged like they had been carved more than written. 3 words, simple and devastating. I saw you. The world seemed to tilt, everything narrowing down to that scrap of paper in my hand. My breath came shallow, ragged, my mind unable to wrap itself around the reality of it. Whoever had been in the bathroom hadn't just stumbled in during the drill. They had known. They had looked. They had chosen to leave me a message. I stumbled backward, the paper fluttering in my grip. My thoughts scrambled for explanations. A cruel prank, someone messing around. Maybe another student who had been locked out and decided to scare me. But the memory of that earthy smell, of the rattling handle, of the shadow hovering inches from me, none of it felt like a joke. It felt deliberate. It felt dangerous. The hallway outside had begun to stir again, the muffled sound of doors opening, teachers releasing their classes, students whispering and laughing nervously about the lockdown. Life sliding back to normal. I gripped the paper tighter, shoving it into my pocket before stepping out, forcing my face into a mask of calm. But inside, every nerve screamed. The boot prints were fading quickly as feet scuffed over them, but I could still see enough to know they had been real. I swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter in my mouth. All day, I kept reaching into my pocket, fingertips brushing the scrap, as though confirming it hadn't vanished. Words swirled in my head, questions with no answers. Who had been in the bathroom with me? Why had they been there during a lockdown? Why leave that note? And most of all, had they really seen me hidden in that last stall, holding my breath and praying not to exist? By the time the final bell rang, exhaustion weighed me down more than my backpack ever could. I moved through the halls on autopilot, eyes scanning every face, every set of shoes searching for mud, for shadows, for someone who might have written those words. But everyone looked the same as always, voices bright with gossip about the drill, laughter echoing off the lockers. I forced myself to join in just enough to keep from standing out, though my throat was too tight to manage more than a few words. That night, in the silence of my room, I pulled the note from my pocket and smoothed it flat on my desk. The words stared back, relentless in their simplicity. I ran my fingers over the jagged ink until my hands shook too much to keep still. Sleep never came easily after that. Every creak of the house, every shift of shadows outside my window, every echo of footsteps in the hallway. I heard them all. And always, in the back of my mind, the whisper of those words, "I saw you."
Have you ever encountered a silence that feels deliberate? A silence so dense it doesn't just fill the air, it watches you. This isn't a story about superstition. It's a story about a man named Elliot and a truth that should have remained buried under fog and guilt. 3:03 a.m. Not around 3 a.m., not just past midnight. Exactly 3:03. He remembered because the clock on his dashboard had been stuck on that time for the last 15 minutes. Or maybe it only felt like that. Elliot was driving through the mountain pass, one that hadn't been on his GPS. The signal had died 20 minutes ago, and the path felt unfamiliar, even though he had taken this route once before. Only once. 3 years ago. The night Caleb died. The fog clung to the road like it was hiding something. The trees leaned in too close. The headlights barely pierced the mist, but just enough to reveal a shape on the shoulder. A man, standing unnaturally still. He wasn't dressed for the mountains.
Black hoodie, black jeans, no bag, no flashlight, no hesitation. Elliot rolled down the window, his voice more automatic than intentional. "You good out here? Need a ride?" The stranger didn't blink, didn't even breathe. He simply nodded once and stepped toward the car. No urgency, no gratitude, only certainty. When he opened the door, the cabin lights flickered. Not the bulb, but something in the air. The scent shifted, metallic, like old coins and wet stone. The man got in and shut the door. Click. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Elliot's knuckles tightened on the wheel. "Where you headed?" A pause. Then, in a voice so low and dry it scraped against silence, "You already know." Elliot kept his eyes on the road, but the tension tightened around him like a seatbelt in a crash. From the rear-view mirror, no reflection. At first he thought it was the fog behind. Then he realized nothing was behind. No trees, no road, just black. The man beside him hadn't moved, not even to blink. Then came the second sentence. "You told him to jump." Elliot's throat constricted. The way the stranger spoke, slow, precise syllables, suggested more than memory. It suggested intimacy, like he'd been there. "You dared him," the voice continued. "Said the lake would break the fall. Said you'd do it too. But when it came time, only one of you jumped." Elliot's mind raced. He hadn't told anyone that detail, not even at the inquest. He slammed the brakes. The car screeched to a halt, and when Elliot turned, the passenger seat was empty. The fog had swallowed the road again. Elliot stepped out, heart pounding, breath fogging into the cold. There was no one around, no footsteps, no open door. Only the car, and on the inside of the passenger window, a reversed handprint, like someone pressing outward, trying to escape. His phone buzzed. One notification, a new photo, a selfie, him in the driver's seat, and behind him, in perfect focus, the hooded man, smiling. Elliot dropped the phone. V. The loop closes. When he climbed back into the car, the clock still read 3:03 a.m. But the date had changed. Exactly 3 years ago. The night Caleb disappeared, the night Elliot told the police he hadn't seen anything. The night he drove away while someone screamed his name from below the cliff's edge. Now, Elliot drives only in daylight. His mirrors are always covered with cloth. He won't tell this story to anyone in person. He sent it as a voice memo, trembling, whispered like a confession in a cathedral. And at the very end, before the audio cut off, I caught one last whisper. He said, "Next time, I drive off the cliff. So if you ever see someone by the road asking for a ride in a place no one should be walking, don't offer your seat, because some passengers don't want a lift. They want closure." Some books open doors. Some doors were never meant to exist. Emily had always been drawn to silence. Not the absence of sound, but the kind of silence that hums with things unsaid. Old libraries were her haven, the scent of yellowed parchment, the hush of carpeted footsteps, and books that whispered only when no one else listened. That rainy afternoon, she stumbled upon a library so old it seemed forgotten by time. An ivy-covered stone building, nestled where GPS failed and roads narrowed into mist. Inside, it smelled like damp ash and lavender oil, like something preserved and restrained. The librarian, a frail man with thick glasses and a voice like dried leaves, didn't greet her. He only glanced up once, then returned to cataloging by hand. No computers, no background music, just the soft thump of books breathing in dust. Emily wandered instinctively, aisle after aisle, fingers brushing titles like an archaeologist seeking bone beneath soil, until she saw it, a narrow space in the farthest corner behind a row of decoy encyclopedias. A shelf hidden by architecture, as though the building had grown around it in defense. And there it sat, a book with no spine title, its leather cover covered in a shimmer that wasn't metallic, but biological, like insect wings under moonlight. The moment her fingers touched the cover, something inside the library clicked, subtle, almost inaudible, like an old lock disengaging. When she opened it, there were no words, only glyphs, symbols that seemed etched rather than printed. They pulsed faintly under her gaze, like they knew they were being read. The letters were inconsistent, some angular, others curved. They resembled no known language, yet her mind kept trying to assign them sound, and she made the mistake of reading them aloud. Only one line, just one. The air grew thick, and the silence fractured. A sound, too low for hearing, slid into her skull, like thought being whispered backwards. "You shouldn't have read this." The voice wasn't from the book. It wasn't even auditory. It was in the syntax of her own inner monologue, rewritten. She slammed the book shut. The whispering stopped. That night, sleep evaded her. Her dreams came in disjointed flashes, bookshelves stretching into infinity, a shadowy hand turning pages with fingers too long, a voice reciting syllables that unraveled her name. She awoke at 3:33 a.m., in her hand, a torn page from a book she didn't remember owning. It bore the same symbols. The next morning, she returned to the library, not because she wanted to, because something had planted the thought. Like a parasitic phrase stuck in her brain, the book was gone. "The book chooses," said the librarian, without looking up. Emily blinked. "Excuse me? You read it. Now it knows you." She stared. "Knows me? How?" His voice turned low, brittle. "Some pages are not written in ink. They're written in memory. And memory can be consumed." That evening, Emily's reflection blinked a moment too late. The next morning, her voice echoed an extra syllable when she said her name. The entity had entered her, subtle, precise. It didn't need possession. It used language as a vector, a linguistic virus, each symbol a command, each whisper a rewrite of her internal grammar. The final visit to the library came 3 days later. By then, Emily hadn't spoken to anyone. She didn't need to. The whispers filled the gaps. The shadows in her room rearranged themselves nightly. When she entered, the librarian was gone. The books were shaking on the shelves. The lights dimmed, not flickering but pulsing like breath. In the far corner, the book had returned. This time it opened itself, and from within the pages, the figure emerged. Not a monster, not a ghost, but a negative space in the shape of a human. A silhouette that absorbed light. Its mouth moved without sound, and yet, "You belong to the unwritten." The entity lunged, not physically, but linguistically. It rewrote her reality in a single, unspoken sentence. Emily screamed, but no sound emerged, her voice now part of the book. The next morning, the library reopened as usual. No one remembered Emily, but the book remained, back on the shelf, still untitled. And if you listen closely in the northeast wing by the hidden shelf, you'll hear the flutter of pages that don't belong to any catalogued volume. Pages that whisper in languages older than thought. Some say Emily was consumed. Others believe she became part of the book, a footnote in its curse. But one thing is certain. Some books do not tell stories. They are stories, waiting for a new reader to finish the sentence.
Every mall has its secrets. Behind the bright lights in food courts, there are hidden places, hallways, storage rooms, spaces customers never see. Most people don't know about them, but I do. And if I could go back, I wish I had never stepped into those halls. Just out of college, and despite having a degree, it was almost impossible for me to get a job day after day, week after week. I sent out my resume to every game developer and computer company in the country, and a few in Europe and Asia. 6 months into this, my money was running very low. This was when I was forced to face the facts I needed a job immediately. And it didn't matter where and for how much, just in time I found a job. Listing for a video game store at the mall. You hear about them are almost always true. Because of my background in games, I was given an interview immediately and hired soon after. My first shift was the following morning, other than a few hiccups along the way. It kept my head above water, and so I got on with Dell. 2 years later, the meat of the facts began just before my second year. Was about to start because of the high turnover. I was made an assistant manager. Took seriously since I was only a few years older than they were. I didn't care how they acted as long as they did their job. Around this time, a girl was hired that could have been my undoing. The second I saw her, I knew she would be a problem. However, wasn't just her. That was the source of trouble. Her super jealous boyfriend became a thorn in the side of every guy that worked with her. And sometimes store and watch her work, but anytime she would get too close to a guy for his liking, he'd approach them and physically intimidate the guy she was talking to. She never said a thing when this happened. I actually think she kind of liked it. But it would be what would push her away from him in the end. She'd worked through the store for a couple of weeks before someone showed her the hallways that ran along the back every place. She took advantage of the fact he wasn't a If any person reading this doesn't know what I'm talking about, pay attention. You're about to learn something. I'm not sure how common this is, but some indoor malls, those built in the old way where each store inhabited in the area that leased from the mall owner. There are a network of paths or halls that run behind each business. They're used mainly by the employees. The system allows them to enter and leave their jobs without being seen by the customers. Often enter and leave their jobs without being seen by the customer. Pathway to maintain the spaces. That being said, and all my time at that job, I only saw a member of the cleaning staff a handful of times. Most of those times they were sneaking a cigarette rather than working. Luckily, we could still smoke inside the building back then. No one said anything to the office, so they caught you, probably because they were doing the same thing on their breaks. If we were all on the same page now, I'll get to the real story. Like I said, pushing her away on her breaks, she'd often sneak out the back and disappear for a while. Where she went, I had no idea. Really cared. The boyfriend took forever to catch on. But when he did, he was super angry. She continued this routine for a few months. And just one day, she never came back to the store. I didn't attach any importance to this. It was during the holidays, and work was a nightmare. It wasn't Got a bit more interesting. About 4 or 5 days later, the police showed up and had some questions about her disappearance. I was like, disappearance? What's going on here? They then informed me that she had been reported missing the day after she bailed on work by her parents. She had never made it home. And they thought we may know something. The crazy thing was that when they visited her boyfriend's place to see if she was there in addition to him, I was quick to make it clear That I didn't know anything. I had just assumed she got sick of the place and bailed. I guess they were happy with that, never heard from them again. Time passed, and the situation around her almost faded completely from my mind, until something really big in February happened and brought it back in the crystal clarity. Some workmen were renovating one of the store spaces for an incoming client, and once they had completed emptying the space of finding the source of a terrible smell. Initially, it had been inferred that the smell was emanating from some old food products left behind in the space, but even after the clearing, the stink remained. The next theory was that an animal like a rat had died in the wall. It had happened before they went to the extreme of busting holes in the wall next door to the adjoining space that was also empty and had been for some time. Displays and leftover building materials. It turned out that the mall had been using this space for years as storage, and the place was a mess. The two guys tasked with doing this were about to say forget it when one of them stumbled upon the source of the stink, and it definitely wasn't a rat. Someone had taken a large piece of plywood and put it over a tiny little closet, thus making it invisible. The guy had caught on that the smell grew worse. The wall, and as soon as he pulled back the board, he found what was causing it. The semi-mummified body of what looked like a female was lying on the floor, facing the wall. It appeared the arid and dry Arizona heat had preserved the corpse and suppressed decomposition. This had to have been why it wasn't stinking up the entire mall and managed to remain hidden for so long naturally. The mall was Lunch we gone through at least 15 people in the last year ourselves. When the answer came, no one could have guessed who it was. Early one morning, I was awakened by my manager with the news that Becky Morrison was the person they found in the empty store. My only answer was who he reminded me. That she was the girl with the crazy, jealous boyfriend that had disappeared just before Christmas now. Went back to sleep when I returned. Who did it? The overall favorite was the crazy boyfriend, and everyone knew by now that he had disappeared just after her, and considering his body wasn't found alongside hers, and was a fair assumption he was most definitely nuts, it made sense the story took a whole new angle. Just a couple of weeks after she was identified, an article was published in the paper discussing a possible new motive behind this. The police had received information that Becky had been were meeting in the unoccupied store her body had been discovered in, and fooling around. After following some leads, they were able to identify the employee. He was a 22-year-old guy working in the Hallmark store. No name was given. He told the officers that he and Becky were supposed to hook up the day she disappeared, but he got holed up by the time he had reached the empty space, and she was gone. He figured she couldn't wait and returned to work. It was only a few days. What's missing, his mind went straight to the worst, and he was afraid he'd be blamed for it. So he said nothing then. When the news reached him that the boyfriend was also missing, it was too late. He figured if the boyfriend was hiding out waiting for this chance to get him, it was best for him to say nothing. Just on the off chance he didn't know for sure who the guy was, it all boiled down to him being afraid. And with what I knew, I could understand. Short while too. It wasn't long, but once is all it takes. That was the person who told her about the back hallways. After all, we slipped out there a few times to mess around. Fortunately, we never got busted when she moved on to the next guy. I wasn't hurt. I knew she had a boyfriend anyway now. You know why I had to act as if though I didn't care about her? We figured it was the safest thing. For the boat's turns, Alberti was overjoyed cheating, which seemed to be the reason he would no doubt come after the dude she was with. I felt sorry for the Hallmark guy. It wouldn't take much mental math to figure out who he was if he didn't already know. And since they still haven't found him to this day, the fear of her boyfriend popping up out of nowhere and putting some holes in him must have been real strong. I know I was looking over my shoulder for several years after. The police have this story activity on his bank account or card for years, and I still wasn't taking any chances. 9 years later, a week doesn't go by that I don't think about her. An outsider may have seen her as an easy girl, but I still don't think of her that way. It struck me that she was just looking for a guy that would treat her well, and commit to her for the long term without being psychotic about it.